The spotlight was supposed to catch only Frank Sinatra that night, until it revealed a secret that had been buried for 20 years. It was November 15th, 1963, at the Copacabana in New York City. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and anticipation as Frank Sinatra commanded the stage, his voice weaving through "I've Got You Under My Skin" with the kind of effortless control that made grown men weep. The audience of 800 was mesmerized, hanging on every note, every gesture, every perfectly timed pause. In the shadows behind the curtain, 22-year-old Maria Rossini crouched with her Leica camera, heart pounding against her ribs. She wasn't supposed to be there. The press credentials in her pocket were legitimate, but this particular angle, this intimate backstage perspective, was strictly forbidden. Maria had already captured 3 rolls of film from the authorized photographer's pit, but something pulled her deeper into the restricted wings. The camera felt heavy in her hands, not from its weight, but from the weight of opportunity. This wasn't just another assignment for the Village Voice. This was Frank Sinatra, and she could see him in a way no photographer had ever documented. Unguarded, vulnerable, human. Through her viewfinder, she watched Sinatra's face transform between songs. The public mask slipped for microseconds, revealing something raw underneath. Maria's finger found the shutter release. Click. The moment was captured. "Hey, you can't be back here!" The security guard's voice cut through the music like a blade. Maria's blood turned to ice as heavy footsteps approached. She clutched her camera closer, knowing that these photographs, these glimpses behind the legend, were worth the risk. "Miss, you need to come with me right now." But as the guard reached for her arm, the music stopped. Sinatra had finished his song, and in the sudden quiet, his sharp blue eyes found them in the shadows. "What's going on back there?" The guard straightened. "Just a photographer who wandered where she shouldn't have, Mr. Sinatra. I'll take care of it." Maria expected to be escorted out, possibly arrested. Instead, Sinatra walked toward them, loosening his tie, curiosity replacing annoyance on his face. "Let me see that camera," he said quietly. Maria's hands trembled as she handed over her Leica. Sinatra examined it with the appreciation of someone who understood craftsmanship. Then he did something unexpected. He advanced the film and looked through the viewfinder, aiming it at nothing in particular. "My old man had one of these," he murmured. "Never could afford it new, but he saved up for months to buy it used from some pawn shop in Hoboken." Something in his voice made Maria forget her fear. "Your father was a photographer?" Sinatra's laugh was soft, almost bitter. "Nah, he wanted to be though, always talking about capturing moments, preserving memories." He handed the camera back to her. "What's your name, kid?" "Maria Rossini." The name hung in the air between them. Sinatra's expression shifted, became more focused. "Rossini, that's familiar. My grandfather was Giuseppe Rossini. He worked the docks in Hoboken back in the 30s. Sinatra went very still. The guard looked between them, sensing something significant but unable to grasp what. "Giuseppe Rossini," Sinatra repeated slowly. "Short guy? Always wore a brown cap?" Maria's eyes widened. "You knew him?" Instead of answering, Sinatra gestured toward a small dressing room nearby. "Come on, bring your camera." The dressing room was cramped and dim, lit only by a single bulb surrounded by makeup lights. Sinatra sat heavily in a chair, suddenly looking older than his 47 years. "Your grandfather," he began, then stopped, started again. "Giuseppe and my father, they worked together loading cargo ships, but that's not the whole story." Maria remained standing, camera hanging from her neck, afraid to move and break whatever spell was forming. "My old man, Marty Sinatra, he had debts. Bad debts. The kind that get your legs broken if you don't pay up." Sinatra's voice was barely above a whisper. "Giuseppe, he helped him. Not just with money, though there was that too. He helped him disappear for a while when things got too hot." The room seemed to shrink around them. Maria found her voice. "I never knew. Grandpa never talked about those days. Good men don't brag about their kindness." Sinatra looked up at her. "Your grandfather probably saved my father's life, which means—" He trailed off, the implication hanging unspoken. Maria's hand found her camera. "I have some photographs, old ones. My grandmother kept them after Grandpa died." "Of what?" "The docks. The men he worked with. I was going through them before coming here tonight, trying to understand his life better. She hesitated. There might be pictures of your father. Sinatra stood so quickly the chair nearly toppled. Where are they? At my apartment, about 20 minutes from here. What Sinatra did next would be talked about for years by everyone who was there that night. He walked to the door, opened it, and called to his manager. Cancel the second show. Frank, you can't. I said cancel it. Tell them I'm sick. Tell them whatever you want. He turned back to Maria. Let's go. The drive to Maria's small apartment on the Lower East Side was silent except for the rumble of the taxi's engine. Sinatra stared out the window at the city lights, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Maria's apartment was a cramped studio filled with photography equipment and developing chemicals. She led him to a small table where a shoebox sat, filled with old photographs her grandmother had carefully preserved. These are from 1934 to 1938, Maria said, lifting the lid. The years before Grandpa got steadier work at the shipyard. Sinatra's hands were steady as he began looking through the photographs. Most were group shots of dock workers, men in work clothes squinting against the sun. Then he stopped. In his hands was a photograph of two young men standing beside a cargo ship. One was shorter, wearing the brown cap Maria had mentioned. The other was taller, with the same jawline and intense eyes that Sinatra saw in the mirror every morning. That's him, Sinatra whispered. That's my father. But it wasn't just seeing his father that affected him. It was seeing his father laughing. In all of Sinatra's childhood memories, his father had been a stern, worried man, weighed down by financial pressures and family obligations. This photograph showed a different person, someone young and hopeful, someone with dreams. Maria moved closer. There's something written on the back. Sinatra turned the photograph over. In faded pencil, someone had written, Marty and Giuseppe, last day at the docks before the new job. Dreams coming true. 1938. New job? Sinatra looked at Maria. What new job? Maria pulled out another photograph. This one showed a small group of men in better clothes, standing in front of what looked like a small business. After Grandpa helped your father with his troubles, they started a small importing business together. Italian goods, mostly. It lasted about 2 years before the war changed everything. Sinatra stared at the second photograph. His father stood in the center, wearing a suit Sinatra had never seen, with a confidence in his posture that Sinatra had never witnessed. He never told me, Sinatra said quietly. About the business, about your grandfather, about any of it. Maybe he was protecting you from his past. Sinatra set the photographs down carefully. Or maybe he was ashamed that he couldn't make it work. They sat in silence for several minutes, surrounded by the evidence of a friendship that had shaped both their families in ways neither had fully understood. Finally, Sinatra spoke. You know what this means, don't you? Maria shook her head. It means that everything I thought I knew about where I came from, about who my father was, about why we struggled so much when I was a kid. It's not the whole story. He picked up the first photograph again. It means my success isn't just about me. It's about your grandfather's kindness to a man in trouble. Sinatra looked at Maria with new eyes. And it means you and I were connected by something deeper than a chance meeting backstage. As they prepared to leave her apartment, Sinatra made a decision that surprised them both. Keep the photographs, he said. But I want copies, and I want you to help me find out more about that business, about what really happened to our fathers. Why? Sinatra was quiet for a long moment. Because I've spent my whole career singing about dreams and hope and the American story. But I realize I never really knew my own. The taxi ride back to the Copa was different. They talked about their families, about the weight of not knowing your complete history, about the stories that get lost between generations. When they arrived at the club, Sinatra turned to Maria before getting out. That second show I canceled, I want you to come tomorrow night, front row, with your camera. Mr. Sinatra, I don't think, and I want you to take pictures, not of the performer, but of the man whose father was saved by your grandfather, the man who might never have existed without Giuseppe Rossini's kindness. Maria looked down at her camera, understanding the weight of what he was asking. Sometimes the most important stories are the ones we don't know we're telling, Sinatra continued. Tomorrow night, help me tell this one. As the taxi pulled away, Maria stood on the sidewalk holding her camera and the photographs that had changed everything. Above her, the Copa's neon sign flickered against the November sky, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear music playing. The next morning, newspapers would report that Frank Sinatra had canceled his second show due to illness. But Maria knew the truth. He hadn't been sick. He had been discovering that the man he thought he was had been shaped by kindness he never knew existed. That night, Maria returned to the Copa with her camera and her photographs. But this time, she wasn't sneaking into restricted areas. This time, she had been invited to capture something that had never been photographed before, the moment when a legend discovers his own humanity. The next evening, when Sinatra took the stage again, something was different. His usual confident swagger seemed softer, more thoughtful. Before beginning his first song, he paused at the microphone and looked directly at Maria in the front row. "Tonight's show is dedicated to Giuseppe Rossini," he said simply, his voice carrying that familiar intimacy. "A man who reminded me that our stories are never just our own." As he began singing "The Way You Look Tonight," Maria raised her camera. But instead of capturing the polished performer, she found herself photographing something else entirely. She captured the moment when his voice broke slightly on the word "lovely," because he was thinking about his father's buried dreams. After the show, they met again in his dressing room. Maria brought copies of the photographs she had made. As Sinatra looked through them, she shared what she had learned from elderly relatives in Hoboken. "The importing business lasted until 1940, Maria explained. "Your father saved enough money from those 2 years to buy a small tavern in Hoboken. That's how he supported your family during the early years of your career." Sinatra looked up from the photographs. "He never told me it came from a business. Maybe he wanted you to feel like you had earned everything yourself." They sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had discovered their family's stories were more intertwined than either had ever imagined. Finally, Sinatra made a clear decision. "I want you to keep documenting this story," he said quietly. "Not just my performances, but the discovery, the connection, the truth about where we come from." The spotlight found Frank Sinatra as it always did. But this time, it also illuminated a story that connected two families across generations, proving that sometimes the most powerful performances happen not when we're trying to be someone else, but when we finally understand who we really are.